أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. حمدا لفالق الحب والنوى وخالق العبد وما نوى، والصلاة والسلام على صاحب الحق والبرهان، صاحب الحسن والجمال، البشير النذير السراج المنير، الهادي إلى صراط المستقيم، سيدنا ومولانا ونبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلينا وسلم. أما بعد، نحييكم بتحية الإسلام، تحية من عند الله مباركة طيبة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. إن شاء الله وبإذن الله سبحانه, we continue our Tafseer al-Quran, looking today at chapter 41 of the Quran. Some of the surahs of the Quran are known by more than one name. Chapter 17 is known as both Surah Isra and Surah Bani Israel. Chapter 40 is known both as Surah Ghafir and Surah Mu'min. And this Surah 41 is also known as Surah Al-Hamim. It is also known as Surah Al-Hamim Sajdah. It is also known as Surah Fussilat. But by whatever name we use to call him, this is the chapter 41 of the Quran, and it consists of 54 verses. From the standpoint of the nature of insan, meaning fitra, and from the standpoint of the future of society, this is a very important surah from those standpoints, and we will explain why. The surah has 5 movements. The first movement is that Allah sent down His message, His word, the Quran, but a clear word that explains itself in great detail. So in the beginning, after Hamim, it says Tanzilum min ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Kitabun Fussilat ayatuhu, that this book is sent down by one who is merciful, by one who is merciful and compassionate, by one who is merciful and compassionate. And this book is also a book that explains its verses in great detail, a book where every detail is explained. So it is a book that makes things and makes everything clear. The second movement of the surah is that Allah sent down His prophets. Allah sent down His prophets in order to be able to even make more clear that message that has been sent down, so that this message of the Quran, Allah sent it down and made it even more clear through the prophets that came. And so in the ayah 14, إِذْ جَاءَتْهُمْ رُسُلُ min bayni aydihim wa min khalfihim, and then my prophets came to them from the front of them and from behind them. If Allah had just sent His word and just dropped it down on earth, on the day of judgment, people will say, well, we didn't have anybody to explain to us what this word meant. We didn't have anybody to explain to us the meaning. We didn't know how to put into practice this word. But Allah sent the prophets for that very reason. So after the prophets came and say, this is what this word means, this is what this ayat means, and this is how you live the message. From the moment the prophets came, man ran out of excuses on the day of judgment. And this is why in Surah Nisa, Allah says, Rusulan mubashirina wa mundhirin, prophets that came bringing what man can do and what man cannot do, so that man will have no excuse in front of Allah after the prophets have come. رُسُلًا مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ لِأَلَّا يَكُونَ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى اللَّهِ حُجَّةٌ بَعْدَ رُسُلٍ. From the moment the prophets came, man no longer has excuse. So the first movement, Allah sent a word that is clear. In the second movement, Allah sent the prophets alayhimussalam to make that word even more clear. The third movement is that this message that is made clear in the Quran and by the prophets alayhimussalam consists in two parts. That every message that every prophet came with has two components. What is recommended for man to do, and right alongside it is what man is forbidden to do. What is recommended to do and what is forbidden to do. The glad tidings and then the warnings. What man can do alongside what man cannot do. And this point is the point that I meant when I say from the standpoint of the fitrah, the nature of the human being, this is an important surah. Because this goes back to Adam and Hawa in the garden. Before Allah got them into their mission on earth, Allah tells them, live in this garden. وَكُلَا مِنْهَا رَغَدًا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةِ فَتَكُونَا مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. So Allah said, Kula. Kul is eat. Individual, one person. You tell him in Arabic, kul. If it is two people, the dual form, you say kula, you two eat. Kulu, three or more. So kula is you two eat. You two eat from this garden whatever you want. Kula. Wala taqraba, but don't touch this tree. So the ulama ul Islam say, this is Islam. It is kula wala. Kula wala. What you can do and what you cannot do. And that the message that Allah is telling them, you look at this is what happened. Allah told them, here is a garden with all kinds of trees, of fruit and everything. Allah say, here it is. But eat whatever you want. But that tree over there, do not touch it. Little ulama said here it is more than there is a tree that the man is not supposed to touch, because there is no tree that Allah has created that is evil. The important point that Allah is making there is that man cannot have unbridled and unlimited and unchecked freedom. That man cannot be left to say, you can do whatever you want, just act according to your heart's pleasure. That man, insan, as he is created by Allah, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ. The way Allah has created insan needs limits that are set. Say you need to function within these limits and don't step out of these limits. Man needs limited. Say this you can do, but this you cannot do. That man needs hudud, boundaries, limits that are set for them. Because without those limits, it is unbridled freedom, and unbridled freedom will lead to the destruction of the human being. This is an important message of the Quran. And this is what you see, the result, because man, having stepped out of the limits set by Allah, by stepping out of Allah himself. If I don't believe in you, then I don't have to believe in the boundaries that you have set. And if I don't believe in you and I don't believe the boundaries of what you have set, then that means I'm left to myself to do as I wish and to act as I want. And this is exactly what you see today. You look at what is happening around the world, and especially just what is happening here, the LGBTQ and the LGBTQ plus, and what people are able. If you look at now these forms of quote unquote marriages that exist, it is the newest one is what is called I can even remember the name, polyamorous is a name, and that means like a woman who lives in a place with 3 or 4 or 5 different partners, and these are partners, and this is spreading in the country, and you go from one person to the other, and this is completely fine. This is what is leading to you see the struggle in the schools, you see the struggles in even the sports right now with all of these sex changes, because it is like, well, you have to accept it or there is a problem with you. And you have to look at it exactly how it started. If you remember during the Obama years, it was don't ask, don't tell. Whatever you do in your bedroom, and nobody is concerned about it, that is fine. But that's not going to stop there. Then it was, you have to be exposed to it, just don't say anything. And then after that, now they're forcing you. You see now in where you work, they're forcing people to use pronouns, and these are your pronouns, and there is something wrong with you if you do not accept it. And if you do not only just accept it, but if you don't embrace it, there is something that is wrong with you. And it is leading to this, and this is all what Allah is saying in the beginning. Kula wala. Man, when he's left to his own vices without the hudud, that leads to the ruin of man and that leads to the ruin of society. So they accepted it, and then the people that are intolerant and the people that are homophobic, and now the men that decide that they're women are competing in the sports, and that's the latest controversies all over the country now. And so these biological males are beating the women in their sports because they decide they're female by name, but they're biological males. And now these people and their groups and are protesting and saying, now they're standing up against it. But this is what happens when there is this unbridled freedom. So that man, the message of Allah consists in what man can do and what man cannot do. That's the third movement. The fourth movement, insan doesn't like to be told you cannot do this. And so when the prophets came, we listen to what you have to say. If you tell us this you can do and this you cannot do, then we turn away. They turn away from the message. And this is what the surah said. فَأَعْرَضَ أَكْثَرُهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يَسْمَعُونَ. And most of them, when they heard that this you can do, but this you cannot do, they turned away from the message and they refused to listen to it or to hear it. And they said, فِي آذَانِنَا وَقْرٌ. They told the prophets, we have like cotton in our ears with regards to what you are saying. وَبَيْنِنَا وَبَيْنَكَ حِجَابٌ. There is a big rift and a veil between us and you. So man rejected that. And then the fifth is that there is consequences for rejecting that message, like what is happening today. Confused the generation. One person called the generation of the ones that are growing up right now, the confused generation, because they're telling them in school that 2 men, 2 dads are fine and 2 moms are fine, and they're telling them all kinds of forms is fine. Tell them marriage is something that is just whatever people decide, and then they're going home and their parents are fighting against that. They call them the confused generation. And all of that is born from kula wala, and man not accepting, only wanting the Bashir, but didn't want the Nazir. Right? And so Allah said, and there are consequences on the society for man going in that way. And this is what I meant in the beginning when I say in terms of the future of society, this is an important surah, because then what happens here is that Allah gives examples and said any society that refused to go by the hudud that Allah has set and said, we're not going to follow you unless you tell us we can do whatever we want to do. We're not going to have you tell us what we cannot do. Allah said there are dire consequences. Beware of that, Allah says. And Allah gave us examples of previous communities. Allah started with the people of Ad. فَأَمَّا عَادٌ فَاسْتَكْبَرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. All in this surah. And the people of Ad did the same thing, rejected the Prophet. فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ رِيحًا صَرْصَارًا. And we sent down punishment on them. Muhammad Thamud, and the people of Thamud, the same thing. فَأَخَذَتْهُمْ سَائِقَةِ الْأَذَابِ. They also rejected, you're not going to tell us what we cannot do. And then Allah also sent them punishment. So from that standpoint, it is it is such an important tool to understand these 5 movements. Allah came with a word that is clear. Allah sent the prophets to make that word even more clear. That word consisted in what you can do and what you cannot do. Man doesn't want to be told you cannot do this, so they rejected the message. And the 5th movement is that the consequences for any society that refuses to go by the hudud of Allah, by the hudud of Allah. And so Allah says, then this is what individual is facing, this is what society is facing. This is Fussilat, Surah Fussilat, and this is the clarity and the surah, the importance of the surah. And Allah says, how does society protect itself? How does the human being protect itself? By simply going back to the Quran. Tanzilum Hamim, Tanzilum min Rahman Rahim. To go back to the Quran, Allah says, first go back to the word of Allah, because the word is not only clear, but the word has dimensions that we cannot even imagine. Not only the word is clear, but the word is also pure. Clear in a sense of how it explains itself, but pure has a dimension that is attached to the presence of Allah. So that in the surah, in 41 and 44, Allah says, وَإِنَّهُ لَكِتَابٌ عَزِيزٌ. Some of these people turn away from this book, and yet it is a great, Allah saying, this is a great book. لَا يَأْتِيهِ الْبَاطِلُ مِنْ بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِ وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِ. No crookedness and no impurity can touch it, has touched it, from the front or from behind. Tanzilum min al-Hakim al-Hamid. La ya'tihi al-batilu min bayna aydihi wa min khalfi. Allah is saying this book is pure because I'm the one who protected it. Right? Allah said there is a purity to this word, and that purity opens up this book to secrets and to dimensions that are not explainable for somebody that is only functioning from the basis of logic. And Allah, interestingly, gives an example of that in the surah. You read ayah 26. It says, وَقَالُوا لَا تَسْمَعُوا لِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ وَالْغَوْا فِيهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُغْلِبُونَ. And they said, don't listen to this Quran. Make noise while it is being recited if you want to win, because if not, you are going to lose. And that is a reference to the very early years, after the first 3 years of the call, when Allah told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, gave him the permission to now start to preach publicly. Rasulullah will wait on the days of market, which were some days like just now they have like Saturday market, and every city has different days of the week where they have market. They used to have the same thing in Mecca. And during those days, Rasulullah will walk through, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and will recite verses that have been revealed of the Quran. And the word of Allah being pure and coming from a heart that is pure had such an effect that people will come into Islam just by hearing those words. And so the people that were against him used to say that he's using magic, and these words cast spell on people. Because there's been people who have hidden and heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at his house in Mecca reciting some of these verses, and they just came into Islam, and they were sent to spy on him or to harm him. And so they said he's casting spells, and this is why he's called a magician, that like he's a magician. And so these people, and when they say waqalu, it's one person, Abu Sufyan. So he used to walk behind Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a hadith that says, one person said, I saw this one man walking around the market, and he was reciting beautiful words that I've never heard before. And behind him was a well-dressed man who had his 2 fingers in his ears, and he was saying, don't listen to him or he will cast a spell on you. And I asked, Who are these people? They said the one well-dressed man, his name is Abu Sufyan. He is one of the chiefs of Mecca. And as for the one who's reciting, his name is Muhammad, and he says he is a prophet. This is what it was referring to. Ayah 26 of the surah, that's what is referred. وَقَالُوا لَا يَسْمَعُ لِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ وَالْغَوْ فِيهِ. Make lagwi, like make noise. Like somebody is talking and you start to beat pots, or you start to scream. Make noise, drown the noise, or you will not be successful. So this is a glimpse that Allah gives into the power of the Quran. And there are certain verses where Allah is saying, because of the purity of the word, the Quran comes from a different place. The word of Allah cannot be the same as the word of man. That there is a power that is inside the word of Allah. So Allah says again in another surah, in Surah Al-Hashr, for instance, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. If I had sent down this word on the mountain, you would have seen that mountain break down into pieces out of awe of Allah. A mountain, and you look at in what Allah has created, there is nothing that is immobile. There is nothing that is bigger than a mountain. And He says that mountain, with how big and how powerful a mountain is, it would have broken into pieces because of the power of the Quran. So here, there is just it's a method, right? It's an allegory. It's something that Allah says, I'm going to use something that you know in order to express to you an idea that is not expressible. What you know is a mountain. You know that something that can break a mountain down in pieces has to be something that is powerful. That in another surah, Allah says, وَلَوْ أَنَّ قُرْآنًا سُيِّرَتْ بِهِ الْجِبَالُ. If there was any Quran that can break the mountain into pieces, أَوْ قُطِّعَتْ بِهِ الْأَرْضُ, or that can break the earth asunder, أَوْ كُلِّمَ بِهِ الْمَوْتَى, or a book that can make the dead speak, it is this Quran. So that gives you a glimpse. So Allah says, then what is the solution? Is to go back to the Quran. Right? To go back to the Quran, and that there is a deep link between the Quran and insan. That there is a deep link between the Quran and insan. And this is very important. Throughout the Quran, Allah is saying there is a deep link between insan and the Quran. And part of Ar-Rahman, allama al-Quran, khalaqa al-insan. The link between Allah and the man being the Quran that he has sent down and taught to man. Right? If you see, there is this new challenge that you can see on YouTube where they take somebody, they started with people that are famous, and sometimes they come into the street and just ask people that are willing to wait and to say, to listen to the Quran that they have never heard of or listened to. They just come to them and say, just listen. And then they video their reaction. And there's been some famous people that start to listen and just they start to cry. They've never heard the Quran. They don't know what they're listening to because there is a link between man and the insan. And in Ayah 53, Allah says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. We will show them our ayats in nature and in their own beings until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم, in their own being until they know. So Allah says, I will show them my ayats in nature and I will show them my ayats in them. We also know that the ayats exist in the Quran. So this is why the ulama say you have these three places that are the theater where Allah manifests His signs, because an ayah, of course, is a sign. And that is the Quran, any sign of nature, the trees, the rivers, the elephants, the fact that things grow out of the earth, the opening of the roses. All of those are called ayats. Same word as ayah of the Quran. And the signs in the human being also, Allah said they are also called ayats, they are also called signs. So they say you have these three places where the ayats of the human, where the ayats are, where the ayats of Allah are revealed, where those ayats unfold. These are the signs that exist. And so Allah says there is a link between man and insan, and between them, Allah says this is al-insan. On the day of judgment, you have the Quran, you have the message, you have what the Prophet said, and it is up to you to listen or to not listen, to heed or not to heed. So Allah says, Man amila salihan falinafsi. If you do good, it is for your own good. وَمَنْ أَسَاءَ فَعَلَيْهَا. If you do the opposite of good, it's also consequence is on you. If you do good, consequence is on you. وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِظَالِمٍ لِلْعَبِيدِ. And Allah never wrongs His servants. If you heed, there is benefit. If you don't heed, there are consequences. And Allah doesn't wrong anyone. But know that on the day of judgment, Allah says, Shahida alayhim sam'uhum wa absaruhum wa juluduhum bima kanu ya'malun. On that day, their hearing will testify against them. Their eyes will testify against them. And their skins will testify against them as to what they have done, whether it is good or whether they have bad. What you have listened to, what you have looked at, and what your skin has experienced, that all of that will testify against you. So that the surah, you look at, if you read this, go to the surah in detail, because this is just a 30-minute summary and the tafseer, but you read it, you see a lot of the things that you see in society today. You can see it in the surah, and it's not a long surah, it's 54. In terms of the warnings for what man, if you do this thing, this is what's going to happen. But also in terms of the good things, if you make the choice to heed, to do your best, at least make an intention to do all of what is recommended and to stay away from all that is forbidden as much as you can. And then you ask Allah's help in that process, but the intention is there. If you do that and you go into Allah purely in terms of tawheed, then beautiful passages like 30, 31, and 32 ayats, which really, if you have time, read those 3 ayats because they're just very beautifully written, and the whole surah is very dark because it speaks of man and the refusal of hudud and of the boundaries of what need to do. But then you have these ayats that are very, very beautiful, 30 and 31. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَبْشِرُوا بِجَنَّةِ الَّتِي كُنْتُمْ توعدون نحن أولياؤكم في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة ولكم فيها ما تشتهي أنفسكم ولكم فيها ما توعدون نذلا من غفور رحيم. It's a very beautiful passage. It says, الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا. As for those who choose that we have one Lord, and that is Allah. And from that moment on, they live according to the reality of my Lord is Allah by being upright as much as they can. تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ. The angels come down to them on the day of judgment and tell them, لَا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا. Have no fear and have no grief. And now enjoy the garden that you have been promised. And then they say, we were your protectors in the life of the world. And here also, by Allah's command, we will also be your protectors in this world. And in this Jannah, you will have everything that your heart desire. And in this Jannah, you will have everything that you ask for. And this is a gift from you, from one who is forgiven and who is forgiving and who is most merciful. And the reason why I said Nudulam min Ghafuri Rahim, meaning Allah has forgiven you all of the other things and Allah has chosen to give you this gift. So this is a gift, meaning no one can earn Jannah. It is Allah's grace. We strive as much as we can, but no one can earn Jannah. My deeds only got me to Jannah. There is the grace of Allah first and foremost. May Allah join us to these people that are the ones that He says, تَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ, that the angels will come to them and angels will praise them and angels will open Jannah for them and tell them, our role is just to protect you, but this Jannah belongs to you, and here you will have everything that you want, and here you will have everything that you ask for. May Allah join us and make us part of those people, and may Allah make us part of the people that heed His word. May Allah make us part of the people who choose to follow the prophets as opposed to refuse their messages. Subhana rabbika rabbil izza amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala.